Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here, and I'm back with another installment of What Would Kelly Make. And today, from the parcels I had to choose from, I ended up picking this Halloween set because I thought it would be fun to talk about glowing objects. It is the end of August, but Halloween will be here before you know it, sadly, with the colder weather. So I picked the Winnie and Walter Moonlight set and Art Impressions MEOW-LLOWEEN. I really loved those little cats that were playing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm making a one layer card, but you don't have to. So I'm using a T-square ruler to just give my card a border, a 1/4 of an inch border. But you could do this on just a smaller piece of paper and then just adhere it to a card base versus doing a one layer panel like I am. I think one layer sometimes is a little overwhelming, but it doesn't need to be. You can totally adjust it for whatever you're comfortable with. So now that I have my border down, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my large stamp here. It's that's why I'm using my Misty, because it is a little bit large and I want to make sure that I get a good impression. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink because we're Copic coloring, and I'm working on Neenah 80-pound cardstock. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that down. I have already cut masks for this, so I did that before I even started. I knew I was going to be doing it, so I'm going to go ahead and put that mask in place. In order to combine the two sets, because this image is very large, I'm going to just add some little added details, and one of those is this little witch hat. And I forgot to mask the side of my card. So even those of us who make one layer cards all the time, still sometimes you just lose your little spot. I'm going to tuck my witch hat mask underneath the larger mask. And the reason that is because the larger mask will help to keep that in place because it has more ground. It's stuck to more things. I'm going to mask my bats as well. And then I have 2-inch Post-it note tape, and I just cut them into 1/4 pieces to cover up all the edges. And then I realized that I didn't want, I'm going to do a background with Distress ink, but I didn't want to do the bottom of the ground with the Distress ink because of the lighting, and I wasn't really sure how it was all going to work. So I'm going to cut a piece of Eclipse masking paper. And this is a little bit longer than my card, so it will cover everything nicely. And I'm just going to put that where the ground's going to be. I'll fold it over just so that my ink blending tool doesn't catch on any of that stickiness. And then I'm going to pull out my Ranger Craft Mat. I chose Wilted Violet, Blueprint Sketch, Chip Sapphire, and Black Soot for my background, because I knew those pumpkins, that big bright orange pumpkins, were going to be such a focal point. I wanted something that was going to be complementary, and purples and blues will do that. Plus, it's going to really make that glowing effect pop because the background's so dark. So I started off with the Wilted Violet, and then I'm going to come in with the Blueprint Sketch. I'm working with regular Distress inks, and I know sometimes people have a harder time blending. Make sure you're starting off of your paper. My blending isn't great. You can see here, it's not. But I always go over mine twice, and I find that I usually get really good results with that. So I'm going in now with the Chip Sapphire, and I'm not covering the Blueprint Sketch completely. And then with the Black Soot, I'm really just doing the corners and the very top edge. This is because later on we're going to be doing some white heat embossing, and I want to make sure that that white's really going to pop. So I did go back through and do all of the colors, and you can see here it's a much smoother blend now, having gone back over it. And so be careful, little inky fingers, when you're taking this off, because we have that white border there, and you want to make sure that you're not getting any of your Distress ink that's, I guarantee you, on your fingertips, because it's always on mine, on any of the areas that you have masked. So I'm going to pull off all the masking, which I love. It's always just a little bit of magic. And then we're going to go right into the Copic coloring. So you're probably looking at this color blend like, none of these things go together. Nah. And you would be right. They are not a blending family, but they are a brighter combination for a pumpkin. And it's one that I really love, especially against a darker background like this. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm going in with my lightest color and I'm drawing in my shadows. Some people refer to this as shadow mapping. I didn't even know that was a thing. I heard somebody else say it and I was like, oh, well, I guess that makes sense. But I'm also, you can see on the right hand side there isn't a line for the section of the pumpkins because of their faces. And so I'm just kind of adding in like a faux line just to give it a little bit more texture. And I'm just going over the same line that I laid down with my lightest color with each of my darker colors. I find that this is the best way that works for me to make sure that I preserve my highlight, is by just going in and going through it one time all the way out to my darkest color. And so you can see the little cat is in front. He would be casting a shadow behind where the stem of the pumpkin is kind of inset. So that would be darker, or the cat on top of it, he's stepping on top of it. That would also be casting a shadow down. So those are just the areas that right off the bat, I know that I need to add extra shading to. And then I did add in kind of that little faux line. I'm also shading the lines that the artist drew. And I'm shading them back, so to the right and the left hand side, because of the way that the lines are drawn, they're rounded. That makes the most sense to me for how I would do the shading, is to do the line behind the roundness. So as I'm working back out now toward my lightest color, I'm adding a little bit more of each. The YR04 is really going to be my main color for this pumpkin. And then the highlight will be that Y38, which I think is actually called Honey. I don't know. I don't name these things. That doesn't look like honey to me, but you know, it's a pretty color. So I'm just going to go in with the highlight sections with that lightest color. I'm also going to use that. There's like a little bit of a 3D edge drawn into these pumpkins, and so for the edge of it, I'm going to color the Y38, and then for the actual inside, I'm going to use a Y08, which is a super bright yellow, but I was pretty happy with the way that that looked because a jack-o'-lantern would be very bright. So I'm going to show you how I colored this little lid, and then I'm going to color the rest of the pumpkins off camera, because you've seen it once, you don't need to see it 3 times. We'll be here all night. Or all day, depending upon which time you're watching this. So for this one, I'm adding the shading mostly to the bottom right, because the way that the lid of the jack-o'-lantern is propped up against the actual jack-o'-lantern, there would be a lighter edge there. And this is actually the first time we're going to do the technique. So you can see I left a little bit of a white edge there. And I want that white edge there because that's what's going to catch the glowing light. So one other thing I just wanted to show you, my pumpkins were feeling very one-piece-ish. So I'm going to go in with a W5 and just add some shading to the ones that are falling behind, and then blend that out with a W3. So it isn't anything that's really changing the color, it's just kind of deepening the shadows, and it gives that separation. If you don't like the gray, the way that that looks, you can just blend that out with your lightest color again, but it's just a little tip of something where you're coloring a bunch of objects the same color, and you want that separation. So for the band on the hat here, the shadow is going to be on the left-hand side because our light source is on the right. And I'm not taking the VO4, my lightest color, I'm not taking it all the way over. Again, I'm leaving that white edge. I'm going to use some E20 family, the 23, 25, and 27, to do the stems of these pumpkins. And because this pumpkin lid has a pumpkin to the left and a pumpkin to the right, it's going to have a highlight on both sides. So I'm really only coloring the center of that, and I'm going to leave a whiter edge on each side. We're going to move on to coloring the cat now. There's a lot of black in this card, but I wanted there to be some consistency. So basically I'm doing the same thing that I did previously. I'm starting with my lightest color, which is a C3, and I'm leaving those white edges. That is key to this glowing effect. We want to have those lighter edges. If you have something where maybe you don't want as strong a lighting, you can just cover it with a lighter color and then go back over with your yellow, your green, your purple, whatever your glowing color is going to be. I prefer to leave a white edge, and then if I want to darken it up later, I can. So I've colored all of the shadow part now because the way that this pumpkin, this particular cat is laying in front of this pumpkin, all of his left bottom hand side is going to be in shadow. None of that's going to be getting any light. So you might be feeling like, well, this cat's not going to have a lot of detail, and you would be right. He isn't going to have a ton of detail, but the effect, the glowing effect, kind of makes up for that. So here you can see I am leaving the edges of his feet white. The left hand side, well, it's the right hand side of his face. The right hand side of his face, his left ear, the top of his tail, and then that little paw that is coming up. I'm coloring the left hand side because the light's on the right. Now getting out to this C7, I'm just like you, and I'm like, oh man, you're not going to be able to even tell this is a cat. It's going to be so dark. So I am taking some creative liberties because I didn't want it to be all pitch black, even though in real life that is how it would look. So I'm leaving myself kind of like a secondary highlight of that C5 on his hand and on the top of his little, I guess it's his kneecap. I mean, do cats have kneecaps? I don't know. But anyway, that's what it looks like. It looks like a kneecap. So I'm leaving that there. I'm only adding the black to like the darkest part. So the part that where it's scrunched up on his belly, on the bottom left-hand side, where his legs, his one leg is in front of the other, I'm adding that. And then just same as we always do, blending back out to that lightest color, closing in that gap on the highlight. But again, we want to reserve that white portion. That's very important to this particular technique. It's almost better to leave too much and then you can go back in and adjust it. So I'm going to go all the way out to that C3, leaving just that strip of white there, and then I'm going to leave it there because I'm going to do all of the glow at one time because let's face it, it's kind of magical and I'm giddy just thinking about it. So I'm going to leave it, but I am, I'm going to color in his, this is one of those things I was talking about where you could color something a lighter color and still go over top of it. So I'm coloring the little pads of his feet, his ears with that R32, and we will go over it later. I'm going to show you all of the shadow areas that I would do. Now I'm going to show you how to color the hat and the bats, but I wanted to show you all of the different kitties and how I would do their shadows. So for this one, because the light source is underneath, his light's going to be coming upward. So the top of his foot where his little thigh is sticking out would have light. The stem's going to block it from his belly. There would be light on his face as well as both of his paws since he's leaning down over it. This one, because he's leaning over to the right hand side, most of his shading is going to be on the left hand side. Just kind of across his belly. I did add some shading to the tops of his arms, his face where they're tucked behind his arms, and the arm that's in the back there. All of that would be shaded. For this little cat, this little kitty who has got himself in a situation here, and P.S. I'm pretending like this is the little plastic battery operated lights, so like I'm not putting these kitties in any danger by having them in a lighted jack-o'-lantern. So anyway, his little tushy's sticking up in the air, so most of his light's going to be cast onto his belly and his thighs. For the little face that's sticking over, most of that's going to be in shadow. The light would just hit really the right-hand side of his face and the tops of his paws. For the bats, this particular one, his little teeny tiny tushy is facing the light, so his light is going to be on the left-hand side and a little on that back wing. For the bat on the right, his is going to be coming up more towards his face and just a little bit on his right hand side and the bottom of his wings. So I'm going to color the other cats and then we're going to get into the hat. So here you can see I'm adding a little bit of shading to the right and a lot more to the left. I'm still keeping that highlight. For the bottom, I didn't want there to be no highlight on it, even though it wouldn't be getting that really bold yellow lighting. So I just left a kind of narrow strip to give it a more round appearance. And then again, just blending out to the darkest color. On the actual pointed part of the hat, I only did a line of black. I think that when you're coloring something black, it's important to include that. But it doesn't have to be a ton. It can be just a little bit and still give the impression of black. So here I'm leaving this large highlight area. I'm going to blend that in just a little more with the C3. I don't want it to be a huge area, but I do still want this hat to look round. And this is the way I would color the hat, whether I was doing this technique or not, because it's black and I want it to look shiny. So now moving on to the bats. Bat wings, the way that they're shaped, there would be some shading in between his wings, where those joints, are they joints? I don't know. That's what I'm calling them. Where they meet, they are darker. They're kind of inset in the wings. So most of his shading is coming down from the top. I did leave his eyes lighter, and then the right-hand side, that wing, because of his wingspan, would be spread out. That wing would come out from behind his body and still catch some of this light, because we're looking at it as a very bright light. But ultimately, this is going to be something that you're going to decide when you're doing your card. And I really genuinely hope that you try this, because it's such amazing effect, and it's really not too terribly difficult. So I hope I'm explaining in a way that you feel like you can try it, even if it's not on an image that's complicated or a scene that's complicated. Just try it on something small and see how it goes. So anyway, blending out that bat, but what I was going to say is it's really up to you to decide how much glow you want to have. And now we're to the glowy part. So I'm just going to take that YO2, I'm going to start from the outside edge, so my white edge, and just flick in over those white areas. And already, even without doing the ground, you can see that these little cats light up and they look like they are aglow from these pumpkins or jack-o'-lanterns. And I just love it. It's such a cool effect. And it's really just leaving that white edge and filling it in with your whatever your glow color is. So totally something that, even if Halloween isn't your thing, you know, you could do, you know, with fairies or campfires or fireplaces or lanterns or any of those things, and it would still look totally cool and amazing. So I'm using that YO2 to put my glow out from those pumpkins, and then I am going to give it some ground. I love navy with neon green. So I had already kind of decided that was the color that I was going to do my ground. So I'm filling this in with a YG-01, and they almost look like the same color, and that's kind of the point, is so that I have a really nice blend there. And then I'm going to start adding shading from the left and the right hand sides. I apologize, the right hand side sometimes is a little bit off the screen, because I was just like so excited and in the mode and doing the coloring. And then I'm not doing actual like blades of grass, I'm just doing kind of streaks of color. Because I need the outside edges to be darker to really bolster up that glow. You can see each time I'm adding a pretty heavy shadow underneath the left-hand side of that cat and the hat, because the light would be blocked by that cat's body. So I'm adding those darker edges, and I'm going to do the same thing with the YG-67. I'm not going out as far each time, but adding those darker colors and kind of bulking up that contrast is what really makes the whole scene kind of glow from that mid-center point. So just doing some streaks of color to blend them all in. I'm going to do some streaks of the YG-03 up into my yellow and go over that again with the YG-01 so everything blends really nicely. I did feel like I kind of lost some of my yellow, which is not a problem. I'm just going to go back in with it and kind of just coat that whole area again so it's a really nice bright glow. And then I'm going to bring in my white gel pen. No, I'm not. If you have if you have an area that your masks didn't cover, it's not a big deal. Just grab a Copic that matches and fill it in. Mine happened to be a VO4 and that worked for me. Now onto the white gel pen. And I really just kind of wanted this to be a fun, just kind of magical, mystical little scene of these little kitties. And so I'm using my white gel pen to just kind of add some dots up from the bottom towards the top, to just kind of add to the atmosphere. That's just, you know, kind of fun and playful. I do outline all of my images. I'm using an EK Success writing pen to do that. It's not necessary. That's just how I prefer to do it. in order to bring in some more of those elements from the Winnie and Walter Moonlight set, I'm going to stamp this little spider here. It's the smaller one of the two that are included in the set, because I thought it would look like these two cats were kind of playing with this, like they were trying to play with the spider, just like the cat on the right's trying to play with the bats. I also picked out this spider web. I pre-treated with my embossing bag, and I did mask the white edges of my card. And I'm going to stamp that down in Versamark ink. I'm going to use Simon Says Stamp white embossing powder to emboss this so it's really nice and bold on that darker background. And then I'm just, after I cleaned everything up, there was some stick left from my mask, so it took me a minute. But I'm just going to go ahead and heat set that. I also added a slightly smaller one on the right hand side the same way, just for a little bit of balance. And then I'm going to go in with a white gel pen. Now this is going to be more, less opaque than the embossing powder, which is really good because then it looks like he's on this like silky little string that's coming down from the web. And then I did add just like one or two little highlights to his body so he wasn't just flat black. So, oh, and I don't even know if I mentioned that. I used the Simon Says Stamp black ink for that since I wasn't doing any Copic coloring over him. I pulled a sentiment from that Moonlight set. It says frightful and delightful, because I thought, well, that's totally fitting. You have these cute little cats, and then you got some bats up there and some spiders, and so I'm going to go ahead and use my mini Misties to stamp that down, because we've put in all this work and I ain't starting again. Don't want to ruin it now. So the last thing that I did was just add some clear Wink of Stella to the sky, just the purple areas just kind of flicked up from the horizon line. And then I also added it to anywhere that glow was, so it would have a nice little shimmery effect. So that's basically the whole card. I really hope that you guys learned something and that you will give it a try. It's such a cool technique for you to do on different things. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.